Hello, fellow educators. Welcome to the Classroom Behaviour Solutions podcast, the podcast that gives you weekly scientifically grounded and evidence-based solutions to your behaviour dilemmas, providing a blueprint to developing flexible behaviour solutions that really work for your individual pupils, classes, or even whole school environments. If you're a teacher, a Senko, or even a school leader with a passion for supporting pupil behaviour in a way that is positive and effective, this podcast is for you. My name is Adam Dean, and I'm your host. Hello everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Classroom Behaviour Solutions. So this week is probably going to be our last episode that is largely theory-based for a little while, because I feel like I want to start giving some practical ideas and solutions that people can be getting on with. But I really feel like this is a really important topic that we need to cover. It's actually different to the topic I said that we'd cover in last week's episode, but I think it's more important. So I've kind of alluded to this a couple of times before, the idea of there being some particular functions for behavior. And quite often people use the term that say that behavior is a way to communicate. I tend to stay away from that particular wording because I feel like communication is something that is usually deliberate. So it's something that, I'm doing this thing to get this message across. And behavior, and in this case, we're talking about behavior that challenges or challenging behavior, whichever you prefer to call it. That sort of behavior does have a purpose and does have a function, and I suppose it is explaining a need, but I don't think communication is the right terminology for it myself, and that's just personal to me. So, but there are four main reasons, let's call them, for a behavior, for challenging behavior or behavior that challenges. So let's go through those reasons and then go into them in a little bit more detail. So pretty much any behavior has one of these four reasons. However, I think realistically, it's fair to say that most behavior is a combination of 2, 3, or possibly even 4 of these reasons. So let's have a look. The 4 main reasons for a behavior are escape or delay, tangible or stuff, including watching stuff or engaging with stuff, attention, usually from others, obviously from others, and sensory or automatic. So let's go through those now. So escape. Escape is pretty straightforward. Escape means that a particular behavior is done to get away from something that the individual that is behaving wants to get away from. Could be anything. It could be a task, it could be a person, it could be a noise, it could be anything in that environment. So if I give, let's introduce little Johnny again. If I give little Johnny a piece of maths work and little Johnny throws that maths work on the floor, then that might be, not saying it is, but that might be a behavior that helps him to escape from that piece of work, or delay doing that piece of work. Now, is it likely to be just that? Absolutely not. We're going to come to that in a little while. Could it be something to do with the internal environment? So, for example, if you have a headache, part of your internal environment, and you take a paracetamol, the behavior, the act of taking that paracetamol, the purpose of that is to escape the pain of the headache. So you see where escape comes in terms of a function of behavior. So the next one, and probably the most obvious one, is tangible or stuff. So let's see. So if we go into a shop and we ask for a coffee, we're doing that behavior to get that coffee. Now that is a form of communication, quite literally. If little Johnny goes to the shops and starts screaming, and mum gives him a packet of sweets, and every time he goes to the shops he screams and he gets that packet of sweets, then the function of that behavior might be in order to access tangibles. People quite often assume that a behavior is to access tangibles, and although sometimes they're right, I'd say it's less common than people assume it to be. People assume it's going to be for stuff, and it's not necessarily. The third is attention. And I always hate saying this because it sounds like what I'm saying is, oh, it's attention getting behavior, or they're an attention seeker or something like that. And that's absolutely not the case. We're not talking about doing something intentionally to gain attention necessarily. We're just saying that the function of that particular behavior is to gain attention. Now, that could be for a number of different reasons, one of which could be that they don't have the skills in which to gain attention functionally, or it could be that the functional way that they have to gain attention isn't working. So let's go back to little Johnny with his maths work. Little Johnny throwing his maths work on the floor does help him to escape the maths, but it also potentially gets the teacher's attention, who'll be able to come and help him with his maths. Now, let's say that little Johnny hasn't learned how to ask for help. So this particular way of getting that attention, getting that help, works for him. So it's a functional behavior. That is a good way for him to get that attention and that help that he needs. Alternatively, maybe he has learned to ask for help, but maybe he's tried to ask for help several times and it hasn't worked, and therefore this is the next stage. This is the next behavior in a chain of behaviors in order to get that attention and that support. So we've got attention. That behavior as well, by the way, could be for the attention of peers or pretty much anyone. And there is always an assumption with attention as a function of behavior that people would only want positive, or what we would deem positive attention. So how we've talked in the past about how things that we think of as punishing can actually be reinforcing. Well, attention, or what we consider negative attention, i.e. in the classroom being told off by a teacher, could still be reinforcement because that is attention. So if that behavior, if its function is for attention, then that's a great way to get it, isn't it? So the last one, and the one that's most difficult, is automatic or sensory behavior. And this is where the behavior serves a purpose in of itself. So some of the pupils that you work with that have autism may engage in self-stimulatory behavior, and that is reinforcing in of itself. It's automatic, it's sensory. Now, we've talked briefly about the fact that behavior rarely has one of those functions. It is usually a combination of those different functions. So if we think about little Johnny in the supermarket screaming, okay, maybe one of the functions there is to get sweets, but actually, is that the only function? Maybe one of the other functions there is because we don't like the supermarket. The supermarket's boring, it's bright, it's loud, it's just an unpleasant place to be. When we're in the supermarket, mum's not paying us attention. Maybe it's also, well, it's not going to be sensory or automatic, that's highly unlikely, but it could also be for attention. It could be for mum's attention. Mum's really busy in the supermarket, mum's looking at stuff, therefore when I do this, attention happens. So that's a type of reinforcement. Little Johnny in the classroom gets given his maths that he doesn't like doing. We throw the maths on the floor. We get attention from our peers. Could be positive, could be negative. We get attention from the teacher. Could be positive, could be negative, but it's still attention. Possibly comes with help. We escape having to do the maths, or at least delay having to do the maths briefly. And at the same time, are we going to get any tangibles in that situation? Probably not. Probably not, unless something's sort of been set up quite complex. Like, I don't know, when little Johnny does his maths, he gets a sticker which leads to a tangible, and he doesn't know how to do the maths, so he does that, gets the attention, gets the support, does the maths, gets the tangible. It's quite a long chain to get to that particular place, I think. So there's all those different combinations. Now, am I saying that if a child is displaying a particular behavior, you should assume a function. Absolutely not. I'm going to talk in a later episode about how you can start to work out what different functions might be of behaviors. You should not assume a function. However, if you think you might know the function of the behavior, is there something you can do? Now, the first thing a lot of people would turn around and say is, well, if little Johnny's behavior in the supermarket is screaming and it's to get sweets, then we should not give him sweets. We should stop reinforcing that behavior. And there's some truth in that. But it's not a particularly useful way forwards. The same little Johnny, poor little Johnny, we've given little Johnny some maths here. Little Johnny's thrown his work on the floor because he needs support, he needs help with that maths. And we know that it's that he needs, so we're just going to not give him that because it's not what we would deem a functional behavior. Well, actually, throwing his book on the floor is functional to Johnny, and it works. So if we see a behavior that is disruptive or challenging or to any of those words, and we think we know one or a few of the reasons for that behavior, what can we do? Now, here's the most important thing. We look for a way to teach a skill that will address that need differently. If little Johnny, or we set up a situation in which it's easier to meet that need. If little Johnny really struggles with maths, let's say that's a really good example. Little Johnny really struggles with maths. The first and easiest thing to do is going to be to make sure that we give little Johnny maths that is accessible to him. That's basic differentiation, people. We just want to make sure it's something that he can do. If he has any sort of learning difficulty or additional needs, maybe we need to give him some extra resources. Maybe we need to, rather than give him a whole worksheet full of tasks, maybe we need to give him several smaller worksheets that are blown up with the task. Same amount of work, but just less at once so it's not as overwhelming. So that's one thing we could do. So we that's what we would call in behavior analysis an antecedent intervention. We're going to change things before the behavior to make the behavior less likely. So now we've given Johnny an easier task, still one that challenges, but one that is accessible. We've given him lots of resources to make sure he is able to he's able to engage with the task. Now, what else? Well, assuming some of that behavior that we're seeing is to escape the maths, then hopefully what we've done there is going to make it less likely to escape the maths. What else can we do? Well, part of it was for attention, right? We've said we think it might be for attention. So in that case, we find ways for little Johnny to ask for help functionally. Now, we might say, oh, little Johnny, just put your hand up. But he might have done that already, and he might have got tired and bored, and that's why we've got to this point. So maybe we give Johnny a little visual by his book that makes it clear that he wants help. But maybe little Johnny gets bored when we do that, and that's why we get to that point. So, okay, we give little Johnny a book of tasks that he can do while he's waiting for support. We do all of these sorts of things so that little Johnny doesn't have to throw his book on the floor, in order to gain that support. This is what we're doing. We're recognizing that these behaviors have a function, they have a purpose for these individuals, and that we're finding a way for them to have those needs and those purposes of that behavior met in a more functional way. And we'll talk about different ways of doing that in more detail in later episodes, but it's really important that we get our head around that. Now, here's the thing. If you think that the behavior, and we'll stick with little Johnny and the maths, is for escape, and you make the work easier, and you put in all the supports, and it's still not working, then you have to start asking your questions about whether or not your hypothesis was correct. Is that actually about escaping the maths? Is the maths work actually the problem? It might still be. Maybe you need to make it easier. Maybe you need to add more support in there. But it might not be. Maybe it's purely about the attention. Maybe it's because there's no reinforcement at the other end. We haven't even talked about potential reinforcers aside from completing the work or the reinforcers that the behavior's basic reasons are for. So there could be a whole load of different things. Now, I know that a lot of people are now sitting there thinking, blimey, Adam, you've just given me a whole lot of work to do for little Johnny, because now you want me to differentiate his work these ways. You want me to put in all these different supports. You want me to give him a little bit of paper that says, I need help. You've asked me to give him a little workbook, and you're right. I've given you a lot of stuff to do there just for that situation for little Johnny. But here's the thing. You'll do those things, and if they work, you won't be dealing with little Johnny throwing his book on the floor and the fallout of that. A lot of the behavior support techniques that we're going to talk about in this podcast are going to be things that they'll take a bit of work from the outset, but once you've done them, there'll be less work because those things will be there. So, key takeaways from today's podcast. Behavior always has a function or a purpose. It's usually a combination of 1 to 4 different things. Those things include escape or delay, access to a tangible, attention, be it positive or negative, or automatic sensory reinforcement. We can start to guess or hypothesize what those functions might be for a particular behavior. If you're seeing a particular behavior, you might be able to start guessing or hypothesizing. However, once we think we know what we are doing, we should be seeking to address that need, that purpose for that behavior, not to ignore that need. We need to recognize and address it so that that child doesn't need to use that challenging behavior or disruptive behavior in order to meet that need. Thank you, everyone. Hi, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Classroom Behaviour Support podcast. If you're enjoying this podcast and you've enjoyed the last 4 episodes that have all been about the science of behavior analysis, then I've put together for you a free visual of those 4 episodes